Hello and welcome, my name is Define Disaster, this is Battlefield 1, and in today's video we're going to be talking about the current CTE changes surrounding time to kill of most weapons in the game, as well as of course the new shotgun mechanics. And while we will cover what these mechanics, what these changes represent, more importantly we're going to be focusing on how they most likely will affect gameplay in Battlefield 1, both in the positive, more debatable, and of course negative sense. And I'd also like to propose some minor adjustments, some improvements to these changes to reduce some of the negative side effects of these changes to time to kill and bullet to kill mechanics. And starting off, where better than of course the basics of what exactly has changed. Now essentially, for almost every automatic weapon in the game, the number of bullets to kill your target has gone down in select few ranges. That is in extreme close quarters and medium long range. Now specifically for the SMGs, this is a reduction from 5 to 4 bullets in close quarters to kill a target. The exception of course luckily being the Automatico M1918, meaning of course the Automatico is essentially receiving a nerf to its close quarter power. Further of course to the SMGs, however, we also have LMGs seeing a reduction in the maximum number of bullets needed to kill a target under 12 meters down to 4 as well, and at medium longer ranges down from 7 or 6 bullets to a maximum of 5 bullets, making them not only all more consistent, meaning that you will never require more than 5 bullets to down your target, but also massively reducing their time to kill both in close quarters but also of course at medium longer ranges. Now on top of this, we've also got a range increase to the 3-hit range of the self-loading rifles that don't already have a 3-hit kill at all ranges. These are weapons like the auto-loading 8.35, the Ceregotti, or of course the M1907. Have these weapons have not seen a decrease in the bullets needed to kill. In other words, they're still in close quarters a 3-hit kill, and they have further also not seen an increase in fire rate, which is something we're going to touch on a little bit later. Now, decreasing the number of bullets required to kill a target across the range with pretty much all automatic weapons doesn't just result in quicker time to kills, which has some advantages and disadvantages of course in its own right. It also actually is an indirect nerf to higher RPM weapons and a buff to lower RPM weapons. The reason for this is that essentially the time to kills, while both improving on both high fire rate and low fire rate weapons, improve dramatically more on the low fire rate weapons. To give you an example frequently used on the CTE forums, if you look at the 480 rounds per minute Lewis gun, this goes from a 500 millisecond time to kill to 367 milliseconds, a decrease of 133 milliseconds, quite significant in its own right. Now the fastest firing LMG, the Parabellum, at 700 rounds per minute goes from a TTK of 333 milliseconds to 250 milliseconds. In other words, a decrease of 83 milliseconds, much less of course than the 133 of the Lewis gun. What this means is that the TTK difference between these two weapons, which was previously at 167 milliseconds, goes down to 117 milliseconds, meaning that their performance is closer together even in close quarters than it previously was. This applies pretty much both at close quarters and long range for all of the SMGs and LMGs that have seen a buff. On top of this, what has also happened is you've seen some minor or more major recoil adjustments on most of the weapons, most of the LMGs at least, to compensate for their now decreased time to kill. So some of the more low recoil LMGs have seen a little bit of a bump in the recoil department. They still, however, of course, are not anywhere close to as high as some of the more close quarter focused LMGs, such as the Parabellum at 700 rounds per minute. Having then covered the basic changes and what they entail, let's move on to the positive effects that this most likely or most definitely will have on gameplay in your everyday game of Battlefield 1. And this can be small things like less frustrating pea shooting at longer ranges, where you no longer require 7 bullets with an LMG to down your target in certain circumstances, but a hard capped 5. There's also some more fundamental impacts on the game that these changes bring with them. First of all, the lower time to kill means less time to react to an enemy showing up, especially if you didn't expect them. And what this in turn means is easier access to multi-kills, or it's easier to deal with multiple targets if you're the one engaging a firefight, if you're the one, for example, flanking, getting the drop on your enemy. With a lower time to kill, your ability to take out multiple targets is higher. Furthermore, the PTPM, or possible targets per magazine, goes up. Less reloading for taking out 2 or 3 people. Furthermore, and this is probably the best part of of these changes, especially for those of you who are maybe not too much of a fan of faster time to kills per se, is the reduction in relative effectiveness of grenades and other gadgets. The simple logics of this is if a gun is suddenly more powerful than previously and the grenades and gadgets don't receive an appropriate buff as well, then their power relative to that of the primary weapons simply decreases. Thus, you can expect to see less grenade spam and less gadget spam in the long term if time to kill actually does decrease for most of the weaponry. Now, of course, there are also some effects from changes like the ones currently being tested on the CTE that are less desirable to some but more desirable to others. In other words, debatable results, debatable effects from these changes. And center stage in this category of impacts stemming from these changes is a shift in the skill focus of Battlefield 1 from an accuracy model to a movement and positioning model. And by accuracy, I both entail the distance you're engaging with your given weapon, that is choosing the right engagement distance, and placing your shots extremely accurately, going for things like headshots, for example. With a lower time to kill, these things don't necessarily become less important, but movement and positioning actually becomes a little bit more important. That's because flanking becomes much more viable because your enemy has less time to react when you flank them, meaning you're more likely to actually get off that flank successfully without being spotted, without taking too much or any damage. Furthermore, there's also a first come first kill mechanic that becomes essentially more pronounced with the shorter time to kill. Once more, because of the shorter time you as player have to react to somebody trying to take you out. And when it comes to positioning, lower time to kill actually means that cover becomes more important because you're taken out much more quickly, and thus bunny hopping across an open space becomes less viable. Choosing your right routes becomes more important. The aforementioned flanking becomes more important, and a proactive playstyle becomes more important, meaning knowing your terrain, at least in my personal experience, and knowing how to make use of your terrain becomes increasingly important because failing to do so has increasingly dire consequences. Now, furthermore, on the list of debatable effects that these changes will bring to Battlefield 1 are the decreased power of snipers at medium and long range. They're essentially weakened because their time to kill stays just the same as it is currently. They receive no buffs, no real changes to their performance, while a large majority of the weapons good at medium range and long range actually get a buff to their relative power. Thus, while snipers maintain their spot as best long range engagement weapon, they are significantly weakened in that position relative to their previous power. A sniper is now more prone to the long range fire of an LMG player, more prone to the usage of some of the higher fire rate medium range self-loading rifles such as the auto-loading 8.35 that now suddenly stretch their 3-shot kill quite a significant distance where it becomes dangerous for your average scout player. Another thing we need to talk about is the decrease in power of the sidearm for the very same reason that bolt action rifles have seen a decrease in their relative power. They simply haven't gotten a buff, and as such these weapons have seen a rapid decrease in their actual relative performance in close quarter against most of the weapons in the game. Some of you may find this desirable, getting the sidearms slightly more in line with what they were in Battlefield 4, for most of the time a backup solution, and some of you might find this annoying because you previously enjoyed being able to use sidearms in close quarters at quite an efficient and effective rate. Now, there is of course also some negative effects of these changes that we have to talk about, and they mainly pertain to the medic class. The medics have seen some buff, but not in the raw DPS at most ranges. That's to say, the 3-shot kill range for most of the 3 to 4 hit SLRs has been extended, but their raw damage output, especially in close medium range and extreme long ranges, has not been changed, meaning much like the pistols and much like the bolt action rifles, they actually see a decrease in their relative power. Now, to illustrate this, we can look at something like the M1907. This is a close quarter focused self-loading rifle with a fire rate, I believe, at 299-300 rounds per minute, and this now has a time to kill longer than that of something like the Lewis gun. The time to kill of the M1907 in close quarters at 405 milliseconds is worse than the 367 milliseconds of the Lewis gun. Comparing that especially previously to the time to kill of the Lewis gun at 500 milliseconds, it becomes quite apparent how great this nerf really is is for the medics in close quarters. And while most of you will argue that most of the medic rifles are really best for medium long range or maybe even close quarter medium range, but not solely focused on close quarters, I would argue while this may be the case, there is close quarter focused medic weapons for a reason. The outloading 8.25 or 8.35, of course, the M1907, the Cerigotti is another example, the RSC to a certain extent as well, although you can argue that is more medium range. These weapons exist because the medic is most efficient as team player, as medic, when he is in close quarter, running alongside the aggressive assaults, the aggressive support players, because there he will be able to heal the most amount of players, be able to revive the most amount of players, be most effective for his team. And as such, something in my opinion needs to be done to address the clear imbalance now in favor of everything but the medic class, to facilitate once again the medic's role in close quarter in supporting his team push up by use of his healing and reviving abilities. Another thing to note here on this list is that bipod DPS at range is simply quite ridiculous now. We've gone from, in some cases, a 7-hit kill to a 5-hit kill, and this on weapons that, when bipoded, have essentially almost no spread, almost no recoil, because the decrease of the bipod is so severe. In my opinion, and the opinion expressed frequently on the CTE forums, there needs to be some kind of balancing here, maybe give the bipods a little bit less of a recoil and spread decrease. In other words, when bipoded, you will have to deal with a little bit more recoil, a little bit more spread than previously. Especially important, this is of course for the high fire rate LMGs at 600, 700 rounds per minute. They're just doing a little bit too much damage at range. Now, before we jump into the shotgun mechanics, I briefly wanted to touch on fixing the medics from the current standpoint of view. That is to say, if these changes go live, what additional changes need to be made to avoid the already aforementioned problems with close quarter performance from medics. And there's different approaches here, but I'm going to leave a link to a CTE Reddit post down below in the comments for those of you wanting to fully understand the reasoning behind these suggested changes by one of the users there. But essentially it comes down to a fire rate buff for most of the self-loading rifles in the aforementioned configuration on your screen. And now you can debate over the individual fire rate buffs. Is that a little bit too much? Is that a little bit too little? I've seen discussion, for example, around the RSC. Should its fire rate really be increased to 224 rounds per minute, or maybe to a more mild 199 rounds per minute? You can debate about the specifics, but the general premises of increasing the fire rate of the medics to adjust their time to kill to be more in line with that of the now buffed LMGs and SMGs is, in my opinion, the only possible correct approach at this stage. Lastly, then, we have the less controversial, new and improved shotgun mechanics. Now, previously, shotguns had a cone of fire, essentially, within which the number of pellets individually set for each shotgun would spread relatively randomly, meaning that you could get a relatively nice and even spread, as for example here, or you could get a relatively shifted spread to one side or all towards the outside, as for example here, resulting in unreliable shotgun behavior, meaning that sometimes you would not get your one-shot kill when you really should be getting your one-shot kill, and in other situations would get a one-shot kill despite somewhat missing your target or at a range where really you shouldn't be getting a one-shot kill. And to improve on this, what they've done now is, first of all, set the number of pellets universally to 12 across all shotguns. However, to facilitate the different one-shot killing range, they've essentially changed the damage models individually for each gun's pellets, and they've spread these 12 pellets over 12 sectors in somewhat of a configuration, we believe at least at this stage, that would look something like this. Now, the pellets are still spread randomly within those 12 areas. However, because of the way that functions, it means that the pellets are in effect going to be far less random in the way they're spread out. They're going to be more consistent in the way they hit, meaning shotguns both on the receiving and on the using end are going to be more consistent one-shot kills at certain ranges and more consistent not being able to one-shot kill at further ranges. It's going to make shotguns more enjoyable, I believe, for everybody to use. I wanted to hang this at the end of this video because it's important to understand exactly how this is going to work. Now, with both the shotgun changes and the time to kill changes out of the way, just a quick side note, obviously In the Name of the Tsar is out, the brand new DLC. There's been some very critical reception and quite a bit of salt on the forums regarding the quality of the content. Sadly, at this point in time, I currently don't have a gaming PC available to me. In other words, I haven't been able to even play In the Name of the Tsar, so videos on those DLC topics. With all that being said, as well as these service announcements, let me know your opinion on the time to kill changes, on the changes to shotgun mechanics. Leave your experiences, for example, on the CTE, as well as, of course, your usual video suggestions down below in the comments, or hit me up with them on Twitter. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. And with all that being said, I'd like to thank you very much for watching, and hope to see you in the next Battlefield 1 video.